Hello everyone and welcome to my first ever video on this channel, Julia Speed Builds. I'm Julia and thank you for being here today. This is the first build I'm uploading to YouTube, but I've been building in The Sims 4 for a couple months now. I got this game when it was on sale sometime over the summer for like $4. That's right, folks. Don't buy this game when it's $40. Definitely wait for a sale when it's like $4.99. But I thought I'd share one of my hobbies with the internet because I love posting these things to the gallery. And here we are with our first tiny house build. I've chosen to call this one the Romantic Tiny Home. The inspiration for it was a little bit more of a retreat, a romantic getaway deep in the woods somewhere. Maybe a venue for a wedding that a couple would stay behind afterwards for once their guests left and then spend their honeymoon in this house. Or it could be just a great little family home. It can't be a family starter. It's a little bit too expensive to call it a starter home, but it is big enough for a family of about 3 or 4, even though it is the third tier small home in the what is it, Tiny Living stuff pack. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at the process. So as we see now, there is a loft in this build. It's like a 2-story shotgun house here at the beginning, and I wanted that second story to be a loft because of a picture I had seen on Pinterest that had like a really cool transition between a tiny house's kitchen and the way it kind of like almost went up the stairs in their floor plan. So I was trying to replicate that, but with a little bit of the gaming restrictions, not wanting to let me place doors on specific walls, and then also when you delete the floor off of rooms, suddenly it doesn't think it's a room anymore, so then you can't place doors there. So I had to flip the whole build around sideways. That's what I'm doing now. And make the silhouette of the house a little bit different, but I still enjoy the way it turned out, and now it's kind of like a Z shape or an S shape. But it took a little bit in the beginning to do all of that configuring. Another thing that took a while to figure out too was that I was working within the limitations of the actual like tiny house, tiny living pack. So they've got tier 1 micro home, and then 2 tiny home, and 3 small home. And I think this could have potentially fallen under tiny home still as opposed to micro home, but it's pretty much maxed out at small home, because in order to be able to put a roof on top of that loft space, I had to go up onto a 3rd level and place specifically floor tiles over the section of the house that it didn't recognize as a room. And so I even had to make the like base of the house a little bit smaller because it thought I was utilizing 100 tiles when I wasn't actually. It was probably about 20 less than that. But yeah, so we flipped it sideways and we made it a little bit thinner. And the theme I was trying to go for the decorating was a little more rustic, a little bit cottagey, almost princessy, within that romantic theme. And I think what is key to that is not only color choice, but also the plants and the flowers everywhere. And those plants will add to your color choice as well, because they've got all the pastels and like the earthy, vibrant colors. But ultimately, it was kind of difficult to do that, and I know people complain all the time about like color swatches not matching and everything, but I think I found it especially difficult for this because I was trying to branch out of my comfort zone in terms of color palette, because I feel like every person who builds in The Sims kind of finds their own niche in terms of color swatches that they like to use very often. And so for me, it's this white wood that you see. I like a lot of the whites and blues. And I did ultimately stick to a little bit of that as we go throughout this build. But sometimes I like to just lay down an entire neutral base in the home and then build up color from there. So we start out here with a completely white flooring and completely blue pastel walls. And I think I do that because it's a little bit easier to see everything you're placing when there's uniformity there and it's not just the drywall. You can kind of start your figuring with something that's not necessarily, with something that's neutral but not necessarily like distracting. And so if I build, for instance, in this kitchen that we're in right now, if I build with the browns and they match the blue, then I can build out things that match the browns on that blue background, but then I can go and change the tones and just continuously figure them out. I'm never stuck to anything. Especially since right now everything is kind of white, blue, and black, and I felt like that was too much in my comfort zone and not exactly what the plan was for the style of this house in general. So I decided to stick to a color palette of whites, grays, and dark browns, because I feel like black is another one of those colors that you can kind of stay in your comfort zone with, but a lot of the brown swatches don't necessarily match that often, so I figured it would be kind of the first step. If I was going to keep white and blue and gray in my color palettes, I might as well branch out with a dark brown. So I did, and that probably took me the longest is figuring out which pieces I wanted to be brown when they could be, because for instance, like the door is a much darker brown than like the cabinets are, but it wasn't like distracting, and I thought it still like added to the ambiance. But these walls don't stay blue and these floors don't stay white. Another one of the things that I'm doing here is like playing with backsplashes. I think that's an easy way to kind of elevate your houses in The Sims and make it a little bit different, is thinking about like what accent walls you can have. And so I think I've already put in here like a stone wall behind the oven, and now I'm playing with wallpapers. And the only wallpapers I really like in those selections are from the vampire game pack, but then when you look closely at them, all of the patterns include something vampire-y in them. So on the right there with the navy, those aren't just like flowers and vines and things, those are bats flying around the wall, and I didn't necessarily think that that was romantic, even if the navy was really pretty. So ultimately we deleted that and went for a green. I thought green was pretty neutral and kind of tied in the brown tones, and kept it a little bit homey and rustic while also being still a little bit feminine, even though there's dark tones in there. Now we're working on the bathroom, which was incredibly small, and it's kind of hard to see throughout the building process on the game camera here. I was fighting the game camera the whole time, because I wanted to be able to see what I was putting on the walls decoration-wise, but with it being underneath stairs, in between all these rooms that were already decorated, it was hard to kind of like push through the walls to see what I wanted to see at sometimes. And this hallway as well, the doors kept clipping through the walls and I wouldn't recognize it in time. One of the things that I think I'm constantly like working towards when I build houses in The Sims, because I mean, for me, this is like a hobby. I'm a college student, and oh God, I probably work like 40-hour, like I'm a full-time student and I work on the weekends on school projects. I'm in film school, and so we use our weekends for set days, and there's like requirements you have to complete. So after doing a whole week of school, the weekends are also school. So when I do get free time, this is kind of what I do to unwind. But I still kind of give myself goals in the game. And I think one of the ones that I'm always, because I never play live mode, I'm always in build mode. I think it's an interesting creative outlet. But I'm always like trying to get as realistic as possible in this game. And I think a lot of the people that I see like on YouTube and on Reddit are trying to do the same thing, where you have this game in front of you and it's really cartoony, and some of the physics don't quite make sense, and sometimes they're too realistic and sometimes they're not realistic enough. But I think that as you kind of figure out what the limitations are and how to push them, it gets easier to find that realism in it. And so that's what I'm always kind of keeping in mind when I build these things. Like what would normally be in these rooms? What kind of rooms would you actually have in your home? For instance, I always use the little category on the bottom left there. I find all my furniture. I don't like search which piece of furniture I want. I go by room. And I think it's interesting how the game actually groups furniture by room, because there's always like mirrors for bedrooms and dressers for bedrooms. But, you know, you can also have like full-length mirrors in your bathroom, or like a dresser in a laundry room. And so I think it's interesting to think about just the way that we like replicate our lives in this. We're like, I don't know, I guess like my parents in their master bedroom, which we're working on right now, have a TV, but there's not like a TV in the grouping for it. Like you have to go to like the living room section for it. Or even like in the living room section, there's not necessarily like the kinds of tables you want. So you do pull from like bedroom stock. But yeah, so I guess I'll talk about these bedrooms now. I liked that navy in the wallpaper earlier, so I used that in the master bedroom and made it like a softer gray blue room. I know that pink is typically regarded as romantic, because I know like roses are red and flowers are red, but I think blue is actually a really like soft feminine color. I read somewhere once that like the gender roles that we have assigned now for blue and pink used to be flipped around like World War I or World War II times. I know those are pretty far apart, but bear with me. But I really find blue to be feminine and sweet, so I put that in that bedroom. But then I also put a darker pink in this child's bedroom, but made all of the actual furniture items in there a little bit darker gray or more neutral, which I think played nicely against the pink. I don't typically use the pinks in this game just because I think they're a little bit too Pepto-Bismol, and they really like play into our idea of like feminine Barbie pink. I guess that would be one of my gripes. I know people on YouTube have their whole, all right, EA, it's time to give us this thing we want. And if I had to put in my 2 cents on things I want, it would be more like realistic, neutral wall colors. I feel like everything, all the colors you have to choose from kind of look like crayons unless they're just straight up gray. And even like a nice neutral gray isn't one of our options. I think the gray we have is a little bit rubbery and blue, maybe a little bit dirty. I know we have a lot of like, but then we don't even have a nice brown to choose from. they're all a little bit too reddish yellow. So that would be my gripe. I spent a while figuring out this loft situation. The dining room was squared away really simply, actually. I think that was the quickest thing to do in this house. Found some nice little chairs and a nice small little dining room table. But then this roof was clipping in through this wall, and I wanted to cover that up really bad. And so I spent a while trying to kind of figure out how to do that, because this space obviously wasn't recognized as a room. It allowed the roof to come in through it, and with the specific piece of roofing that I had, I couldn't just hold shift and pull in that one part of the roof. There's a cheat where instead of like moving the actual width and body of the roof, you can just kind of pull down like the flaps on the sides of it, but since this was a complete square, everything had to move at the same time, so I couldn't get rid of it. Ultimately, I chose to put bookshelves in front of it, and that kind of changed the feng shui of the space. And the TV placement I had ultimately didn't work out. I thought between those two windows was really nice and was really communal, or presented an opportunity to create a space that was really communal. But ultimately, we had to get rid of that configuring and kind of catty corner the whole operation. I believe I got rid of the TV entirely and just made it a sitting area, because there was a TV downstairs, and it is technically like in a study, and we're in a loft even though this is our living space. So we'll see what I did in a minute. I can't quite remember. And I also chose this. Oh, we got rid of the green. I forgot about that. I thought we just did the plum upstairs. So we got rid of the green and changed to this plum color, and did the whole upstairs and downstairs in it. I remember picking it because it was back in the theme of kind of like rustic romantic, because it's got that reddish pink hue to it, but it wasn't, the Pepto-Bismol in your face, this is going to be pink now, pink. And then also it didn't have that border on it, so there wasn't like a weird line throughout the two layers that get separated. What are we doing now? I have a bad habit when doing these houses of not being able to complete one task and then like move on to the next one, having like checked off the box. I'm kind of doing the whole house at the same time, which I think if I'm going to continue making these videos, I'm going to have to unlearn for myself, maybe go in with a little bit more of a plan, or maybe be more willing to commit to my choices, because I feel like I'm just flying all over the place right now. We were downstairs a second ago changing countertops. Now we're upstairs picking out couches. I remember with the sitting area up here with the new like plum theme and these bookcases, like, oh man, this is a really serious study now, and none of these couches are really serious unless it's like Victorian furniture, and that's not the vibe either. So ultimately, oh, here I go trying to fix that roof again. It didn't work. I thought at one point I was like, oh, I'm a genius. All I had to do was click shift the whole time. And then that didn't end up working. Here I am adding a chimney to kind of fix the silhouette of the house, and I'm realizing now that I think the front of the house might look a little weird. I forgot to put like a railing on the stairs out the front porch. So even though I have like a roof and two columns, I don't have a railing for the stairs to make it look like an intentional piece of building. So I'll keep my eye out for that in the future. These were the couches I ultimately went with. I liked that love seat, as if, like, all the other couches were really, really big, and this one was finally the right size. And it had a nice color for the color palette that like stood out. I was like, okay, fine, you can have your white furniture in here. because I typically default to the white, grays, and blacks and blues. We've been talking about that. But I thought, I don't know, this is kind of like a dark cubby at this point. Might as well brighten it up a little bit with the furniture. And I like that rug too. I never really use rugs in my build. I like them a lot, just for the ambiance of the space, but I can never really find one that fits. But fortunately, this one did, and I think it looks really cute, kind of catty-cornered like that, and makes the space a little more functional, just to look at and both for your Sims. I feel like I'm talking about this really seriously as if I'm going to move in, but I think that's one of the things myself and others really like about the game, where you can build, like, little... I mean, that's the whole point of playing, like, a life simulation game, right? For me, it's build your dream home over and over again. Pretend like you get to live there. So I think at this point, I had decided I had a little bit of decision fatigue on the furniture inside the house. I hadn't done any of the clutter yet, but I'd gotten all the big units in there and was satisfied with that, so I moved outside. And here's where we started the daunting task of building a forest in Newcrest. I purposely chose a really big lot for this. I believe the lot was called, I have it written down here, Optimist Outlook. It's a 40 by 30 lot. And so I picked like the biggest lot I could for a tiny home build, because I knew I wanted this cool outdoorness to it, this landscape. I wanted to be able to build out the landscape. Because I think that kind of ruins the realism sometimes when you have to build something kind of out of the box for the game, but you have to build it in a neighborhood with no other houses. So, like, this wouldn't have felt as homey or secluded if I had just put it on a small lot in the middle of other empty lots. So I chose the biggest one and put a bunch of trees in it. With the danger of the game lagging. When I added all these rocks, I could definitely start to tell I was encroaching, putting too many pieces down in the game, and my computer was starting to sweat a little bit. But I wanted this water element in it because I feel like that adds to, like, tranquility and seclusion and wilderness. While also being really pretty. And I think this is one of the things that I see a lot of people in, like, the gallery doing, or, like, the people who really take, like, shell challenge builds into, like, new territory. They always have some sort of water element and make the fountain feature in the game really work for them. So for me, it was all about trying to figure out how to make these hard edges look natural in this landscape. And I think obviously if I'd given it like another 30 minutes to an hour, I could have really built it out and made it look like something special. But I got to a place where I was satisfied with it. This was the first time I'd ever really, like, gone to town on some rocks on a riverbed. But it really came down to just, like, not caring which rock I was choosing and where necessarily it was placed. I would just put the big ones in the corners, and kind of mess with the sizing of the other ones around it, and place them with move objects cheats. And then we ended up with this really pretty river on the side of this house. I wanted it at the end to look like it had come out of somewhere, but that's hard to do with the limitations of where you can place things on your lot. So I kind of just hid it with some trees. I made, like, the opposite end of this river. It ends right here in a little pool. But then I covered the whole thing with trees, so a viewer may not know where it came from. This is just where the river ends. And on the other side of this house, I built up like a tree, like a farmed and manicured tree wall, so that it is kind of like man-made seclusion. I messed around with it for a while with different sizes of trees and different placements and ratios of the different kinds so that it didn't look too manicured, but it did look intentional. Because I feel like that adds to the whole idea that I've been talking about the whole time of it's a rustic house in the woods, but it's a nice upkept house, built with some intention. Then we start going to town on some flower beds. I think this is really what did it for the house. I know I have flower boxes at every window, and then also I specifically chose the windows with those shutters because they add a little bit of like colonial charm to it that I was looking for. And instead of making, but with all of this being manicured, instead of making like very intentional fenced off flower beds, I kind of just put wildflowers everywhere, which I think added to a nice overgrown feel of like English cottages with the overgrown ivy we would see. But instead of ivy, it's just wildflowers that have grown everywhere. I think the key here too, just like with the river rocks, is that you kind of have to allow yourself to randomize it. Sometimes I would get in my head about, oh, I've had too many of these placed in the same area, like the lavenders, the little purple flowers, and be like, or this one's too big, I can't put it here. But when I kind of allowed myself to just click wildly on things and place them down and resize them, that's when it looked its best. Oh, and then I found those little cattail things and realized I could up the ante on the riverbed even more and make it look even more natural. I also specifically placed one magnolia tree behind the house. I grew up in the South and where magnolia trees grow, and I felt like that was like a key feature to some of the houses that I grew up around and that my friends grew up in as well, where there would just be like one magnolia tree in the backyard and it would bloom in the spring and smell really good, or the summer and smell really good. So I wanted this house to have that, especially with the romantic vibe. I think one beautiful blooming magnolia tree would add something to any venue. Another thing with those flower beds is if you add a little bit of like the dirt paint underneath them, they look a lot more intentional than if they're just placed. Back on the theme of how to make this cartoon game feel real, and have an element of realism, is thinking about what those textures would be. And that's something I've seen a lot, is when you add dirt underneath your flower beds. It looks well placed, and it looks like they're really growing, or it looks like there's some extra thought behind it that makes sense when you see it. And I did put the lot on night mode to make sure there was lighting all around, because what's the point in having all of this lush greenery if you can't go outside and enjoy it when the stars are out? See, here I go again talking about this as if it's real, but that's the whole fun of it. I tried to play around with rugs outside too, because I thought it would be pretty cool to have the idea of a picnic area, but not necessarily where you're just supposed to sit and eat out of a picnic basket on a rug, but having some kind of back patio that was non-traditional. And especially with the limited tiles, I didn't want to just like add something to the back of the house. So I tried just putting down wood tiles, and it looked weird too. So I was like, you know what? Get rid of the grill. There's an oven inside. I'll just place the picnic table because it looks like it makes sense there. So I am about to go back inside the house to finish the like detailed cluttered work everywhere, and I turned on the cheat show hidden objects for this and used some debug items, specifically these bottles. And something really funny is about to happen. When I thought I had them all placed correctly, and then I panned to the side and realized that none of them were actually on the plane with each other, which I think is just one of the funny, like, it's not like a glitch. I could call it a game glitch, but it's not. But that just made me giggle. Placing all the other little clutter in here. I don't have like a coffee maker or a microwave in here, but I still like to use all the little tea and coffee items. I think they're really cute clutter. Like, it's one of those things that I wish I had in my house, is the mug rack. And also the herbs above the stove. I wish I had one of those. I love spices. Paprika is one of my favorites. Right next to just garlic powder, because why not? And I like these little window arch thingies. I've played around with them before and done that little configuration where I overlapped them. And I tried to do a little bit more of that upstairs because it was proving difficult to decorate the like open walls for the 2 floors with the lofted area. But when you blow those items up with the bracket keys, the arch gets huge. So I couldn't do that. That was one of the challenges, I think, for this build too, was finding artwork and just wall clutter for the amount of space that there was, because it is a tiny house, so it does feel small. It feels like there's less work to do in terms of clutter and artwork and just the ambiance of the space. But with that lofted wall, there was so much dead space there. Because we're in a really weird size right now where it's in between being too small to even consider decorating and still a little bit too much space to just leave blank. So that was one of the challenges for this. I liked imagining that child's bedroom. I like to think it's a girl, just because of the patterns and things on the wall. I really liked that light bulb poster a lot, and obviously the not Harry Potter poster. And then I don't know what was happening here. There were some city living paintings that were just absolutely huge, and I couldn't get them back down to size. So I made a little wall mural with these kind of like scientific sketch paintings that I thought were really cool. I've done that once before as well, but I thought the situation called for it again to just get that mosaic effect of artwork. Another thing I wish I had on my walls, but I'm a little bit more conservative in real life. Moving on to that bathroom, this is where it was hard to kind of get into that space to see what I was doing, because it was so small and underneath so many things, where if I had one wall up option up, I couldn't see like the space I was actually putting a mirror on, but if I put all the walls up, then I couldn't even see anything. So I dealt with that. Also, when I replaced the lot later to play test this house, for some reason a wall is in front of that shower, and to delete that wall deletes all of the cabinetry. I think it just respawned when the lot gets placed. I think it respawns with that with the walls underneath the stairs that I initially deleted, so that there was space under there. So if you put this lot down in your game, that might be something you have to configure for a second, just putting the cabinets back up in the kitchen. I don't know why something like that would delete. It was weird. But yeah, here I go again with those little arches, playing around with different colors and configurations, trying to make some new form of art out of them. And it didn't really end up working. I think I ultimately delete these and just put up some normal photos. Because that was that space that was kind of awkward. I didn't even know whether or not I should keep that upstairs window there or like the curtains on them. I don't think you would actually put more curtains on your windows if it was right there in real life, but it looked kind of weird to leave that window naked with all the other windows having treatments on them. So yeah, I think we're just about done. Thank you guys for bearing with me through this first video. I know this audio is a little bit muffled, but you know, you gotta start somewhere. And this is just what I enjoy doing, so I'm glad I could share it with you today. And here are some screenshots of our overall results. So I hope to see you soon, and find me in the gallery.